Chapter 10 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 10. The Secret Monty Kept. Cairo at last! My watch said that the journey took only 3 hours, but my nerves said 6. I had telegraphed Biddy first thing in the morning the hour of my arrival with the Candace crowd, and I half expected to see her at the big red and white station, but there was no familiar form in the throng, the gay throng which excited my charges. Everything interested them: the black face of the Sudanese engine driver who looked down from his huge British locomotive, the display of English, French and German literature mingled with Greek, Italian, Arab or Turkish papers on the bookstall, the ebony and copper-coloured luggage carriers who seemed eager to take one another's lives, but in reality desired no more than to snatch each other's jobs under the eyes of the uniformed hotel porters. To me the busy place was a desert lacking one face. Even outside the station yard, and in the streets and squares where silent camels looked their contempt of electric trams, soldiers in khaki uniforms jostled Bedouins in khaki robes, and drivers of arabeahs made the way one long procession of shrieks. I still glanced at passing carriages in hopes of a belated Biddy. All in vain, and destitute of news I resigned myself to the task of piloting the set out to Mena House. The moon would be full that night, and it's the thing to be a neighbour of the Sphinx while the moon feeds her with honey. The flock, under the guidance of Mr. Watts, had now definitely parted from the set, chieftained by me. They went meekly off to the cheaper hotels, where they would live before boarding the Candace again for Palestine, and Colonel Corcoran, who was supposed to have joined that party, announced that he was bound for a long talk with Mark the Lark. Mr. Watts, refused by Enid Biddle and separated from her, had relapsed into melancholia. He had ceased to brilliantine his once sleek hair, and dust and crumbs were allowed to collect in each fold of his clerical waistcoat. As we of the set buzzed richly away in taxicabs, I saw him in a shabby arabeah between two old ladies, gazing wistfully after us. He was envying me Enid. It is a wonderful drive through Cairo to the Pyramids, whether you spin out there in a motor, or trot on a donkey, or lilt on a camel, squatting cross-legged on a load of green bersim. Past the great swinging bridge, and the island of Gezira, the word that in itself means island, begins the 6-mile dike, in which the road is made by Ismail to please the Empress Eugenie. Since her visit, in the days when the Suez Canal was opened, it has pleased 2 empresses, and more queens than I have time to count. Under the deep shade of lebbek trees it goes on, toward the Pyramids, a dark cool avenue high above cultivated fields flooded by the Nile when the river is up. The emerald waves of grain flow like green water to the foot of the broad dyke road, and canals like long, tight-drawn blue ribbons are threaded through it, their ends lost to sight at the shimmering horizon. Even at this noon hour, when the world should have been eating lotuses or luncheon, the interminable arbour was crowded with strings of camels, forever going both ways, into Cairo and out, one wondered why, and there were flocks of woolly brown sheep, and donkeys drawing sideless carts in which whole families of veiled women and half-naked children were seated tailor fashion. On we spun, past the zoo, past scattered villas of Frenchified, Oriental fashion which might have been designed by a confectioner, past azure lakes left by the ebbing Nile, and so into sudden dazzling sight of 3 geometric mountains in a tawny desert, 2 monsters in size, and 1 a baby trying to catch up with them. "Oh!" everybody breathed, for these things were beyond words. Then in a moment more the Great Pyramid had grown so big that it loomed over us, and ate up half the sky, a pyre of yellow flame against a flame of blue. We were at the end of the shadowy road that leads like a causeway to the desert, and on the verge of the golden, billowing sea which flows round the Pyramids and engulfs the distant Sphinx. Oriental life encircled us; in the foreground of the picture, a long row of waiting camels gaily saddled and tasselled, delicately nibbling bersím green as heaped emeralds; donkeys white and grey, beribboned and beaded, small yellow sand carts, little white desert horses and tall brown desert men, camels snarling, donkeys braying, horses whinnying, and men touting. Very nice sand carts, very nice camels. Take ladies and gentlemen quick to pyramids and sphinx or petrified forest. Farther on, the big modern hotel, rather like an overgrown Swiss chalet built by Arabs, a vast, confused building the colour of sand or brown heather honey, with carved mushrbiyeh work lending an Eastern charm to windows, balconies, and loggias, and enough green, flowery garden to give a sensational effect of contrast with the tidal wave of the desert poised ready, it would seem, to overwhelm palms and roses. Clustered near, the tiny mushroom village which huddles under the shelter of Cheops Pyramid. Beyond, the immense upward sweep of golden dunes, culminating in the Great Pyramid itself. I stayed in the picture only long enough to settle my big children into their quarters, and to see most of them making for the dining room, agreeably oriental with its white and red walls, its dome and windows of mushrbiyeh work. Then I darted back to Cairo in a taxi driven by a Nubian youth, so black that he was almost blue like a whortleberry. He wore a scarlet tarbouche, a livery of violet, and the holes for silver rings in the tops of his ears were so large that the light shining through gave the effect of inserted diamonds. Unconsciously he made a nice contrast with his modern motor. He drove with such reckless speed that camels rubber-necked to look at us, and whirled me past the fat black gatekeeper into the Gezeria Palace garden of scarlet paths, moonlike lamps, khedivial statues, and spreading banyans where each tree continued itself in its own next slumber, like an endless serial romance. I nearly asked for Mrs. O'Brien, but turned her into Jones at the danger point. The face of the concierge, as he said that she was at home, conveyed nothing, yet I could not resist adding, "Are the ladies well?" "Mrs. East is not very well to-day," he replied. "We have had the doctor, but the young ladies have been out spending the night with friends, I believe. They have not yet returned." It was a long 5 minutes before Biddy and I were wildly shaking hands in a huge private sitting room all red and gold brocade and crystal chandeliers, as it had been in the days of Ishmael. I knew I should be delighted to see her, but I didn't realize that it was going to be quite as good as it was. "Anyhow, you're all right and safe," I heard myself blurt out. "I'm safe, but not all right," she reproached me. "My messenger who went to the train didn't find you from my description, I know, because he came back with my note. Too flattering, was your description, or the other way?" I asked, trying to buoy her up with frivolity. "You wouldn't joke if you'd read the note. Oh, Ernest, Monny and Rachel have disappeared!" "Good gracious! But Anthony he went to look for them, of course, and he's disappeared too!" By Jove! The exclamation sounded inadequate, but I was so taken aback that I had nothing else to say. It seemed impossible that Anthony, instead of averting danger, could be involved in it himself. It was unlike his resourcefulness. I could not believe it of him, and so, when I had time to control mind and tongue, I said as much to Biddy. "Yes, I felt like that too, at first," she admitted. "He gives one the impression of being so infallible in any emergency, somehow, as if he'd be above it, and look down on it from his height. But it's more than 12 hours since he went, and he promised to send me word how things were going on if he couldn't get to me himself. No word has come." "What have you done?" I asked. "Have you communicated with the police?" "Sir Marcus Lark has. He was at the ball, and has been very good. But it's for Mrs. East's sake, mostly. One feels he's glad it happened, to give him the chance to win her gratitude or something. He's been back and forth all day, and I'm expecting him any minute. Mrs. East has been fainting and hysterical, and everything early Edwardian, so I sent for a doctor. But she's better on the strength of sal volatile and eggnog, and she's promised to see Sir Marcus." "Now tell me what happened from the beginning," I said, when I had made Biddy sit down by me on the sofa, and was trying to warm a cold little hand in mine. What it all amounted to, told disjointedly, was this. Since Monny had had an inspiration the day after our arrival in Cairo, to give Rachel Guest a lot of her new unworn clothes, Rachel had become quite girlish and flighty. She had lost her Puritan primness, and behaved more in accordance with her slanting eyes than with her bringing up. She giggled like a schoolgirl rather than a schoolmistress, tried to make herself look young, and copied Monny in the way she tilted her hat and dressed her hair. No harm in this, but it had seemed to Biddy that Rachel deliberately incited the girl to do things which "Antoun" disapproved. Brigit fancied that Bedr's influence